Greetings, Secretary Blinken, Vitayo, President Zelensky. I am here to not do that, but to follow up on just the current events from when I published this video back on October 8th. When I had mentioned all these things, and I had stated here to our current leader, this is the situation that we're in with just our rhetoric that we've created against President Putin, where we constantly are criticizing, have criticized, let's just put this all in the past. We've criticized all the outcomes as failures towards whatever each individual may think is the light guiding President Putin, to which I explained from my perspective and from my intuition based on what I've read on President Putin's birthday fortune, to which I posted the video just wishing him a happy birthday in Russian, Здравствуйте, as a sign of encouragement to my current leader to just kind of imitate this, just take that extra step to bridge this gap. And then I saw a response where President Zelensky had contacted the face of good and evil, Luke Skywalker, Mark Hamill, on Twitter, and it was blasted that President Zelensky contacts Mark Hamill, the symbol of good and evil, to do what's good in this sense. And again, Mark Hamill, God bless him, was eager to help, but again, didn't know how to help. And so he just turns and just asks, as somebody who is able to just give any kind of help, what kind of help do you want? To which you said, drones. And so Mark Hamill, Luke, says, we need drones. And so I guess we've been just delivering drones. It's just, here's the test of light that I see. Okay, so, just that's a side observation on entanglement. But again, we're in this season where now the season is a weapon that can be used. Ultimately, let's step backwards, because it's ultimately just going to be a matter of compromise at this point, to be able to just approach President Putin and try to understand why he's doing this. He is not doing this because he is some dictator, tyrant, egotistical leader that past leaders have made it seem that he is, and it's just all in the past now. So in this new age, this year one, where we are just going to approach and just try to see the carrot on his stick, to which I would assume it's just, here is a time in human history where Ukraine, you have had, and I'm talking to you as a country, a united, independent entity from your motherland, Russia, the USSR. So it's just, here's that kind of history. So here's the tie that I feel President Putin is trying to mend, in a sense where, like a wise nation like China, who have just been around. Communism is something that the world vocally says that they despise, but do not vocally acknowledge the cog that communism and that ideology has played in the success of human history today. I mean, it's just, they were always there to push America to get to the moon first. Or, just, we've kind of, like Democrats and Republicans here, have always looked at each other as two entities facing each other. Like, and they're on the left and we're on the right. But now we have to look at things as like, here are the leaders who are trying to look in the right direction. And Russia, along with Iran and just all these other countries that have just been, aside from Russia at this point, but all these countries that have been ruled by heirs, North Korea particularly as well, which kind of all stems into this experiment. So if the supreme leader of North Korea is watching, 안녕하세요. 내 이름은 찰스예요. I feel that Russia had, way back in Stalin, in the time of this Korean War, where it was just like, what ideology will spawn the Messiah? I feel this is my theory, the experiment, so here's the American experiment being tested, able to be tested. And this is, again, my theory of how I came to be. My family was chosen, and just through the scrutiny and just by the grace and will of God, the Creator allowed me to just pass this test, to be able to sit here and just say, President Zelensky, now we're in a situation where your people need you to think of a way to approach President Putin and just say, okay, if this is your plan to unite Russia in this sense, just like China is trying to do with Tibet. It's like, you guys both have your independence, but when push comes to shove, which side are you a child of? Are you going to go to NATO, or are you going to be US dependent? Or are you going to acknowledge that, no, we are part of China, okay? And then just say, China, we will come back to you. If you, in front of a candid world, promise and acknowledge that we will not be stomped out, that what we stood for as an independent will be now adapted into that old motherland ideology that I feel President Putin and, President Xi Jinping, like all these leaders are trying to do. And just seeing how, again, America, the ultimate begotten child of the old world, the Eastern world, that's who I see this world, this new world, the Western hemisphere, as to that side of the world. We are the begotten child, that we are the ones that they're relying on to just come in and see the light and just say, wow, we gotta look at this. Putin's not looking for an off-ramp. He's looking for people who can just see the big picture. And the big picture is just, you are a part of Russia. You are not a part of NATO. And if anything, it would be beneficial to the world if you could bridge this gap with President Putin and then work out this compromise. And together as leaders, the strong leaders that you guys have shown us to be, use that energy to then perhaps bridge this gap between NATO and the EU and all this stuff. This would be my approach. So again, President Zelensky and, Secretary Blinken, just...
To the program.
Christian, great to be with you.
I just wanted to ask you, because you've just been meeting with your Ukrainian counterpart.
And all of that has to come together, and it is. We have a very deliberate process established by the Secretary of Defense, Lloyd Austin, in Ramstein, Germany, that meets regularly to make sure that the Ukrainians are getting what they need when they need it.
So let me ask you then about the somewhat confusion from the Pentagon and from you all at NATO regarding American Patriots. As you say, they definitely need anti-air defense systems. And clearly you must think that they need more as Putin ratchets up his missile attack and his missile wars against cities. So will the United States give Patriots...
So again, Mark Hamill, Mr. Hamill, if you are watching this as well, I hope you see where you kind of didn't rise above the empire at this point. So nothing against you, but these are opportunities that, some doors only open, and then sometimes we only focus on the door that's closed, that we stop looking for other doors that have opened up, I guess would be the way I would put it in this situation based on this.
Systems, and if not, why not?
So I'm not going to speak to specific systems. The Pentagon is focused on that. What we've been working to do is to make sure that at any given time, they have the most effective systems possible to deal with the threat that they're facing. We just recently, for example, provided them with a very effective system called NASAMS that they're using very effectively. Before that, of course, we had the HIMARS, which they used to great effect both in southern and eastern Ukraine. So virtually every single day, Christian, the Pentagon is looking at this, listening to the Ukrainians, consulting with allies and partners, and if we don't have something, trying to find it elsewhere. That's part of this entire coordination process.
What goes through your mind when you see how President Putin and the Russian military is basically shifting from what you're all terming failures on the battlefield and losses of territory to this relentless attack on the cities? Again, are you satisfied that as much anti-air and the sophisticated, missile defense systems are getting to them in time?
Christian, what we're seeing, to put it in one word, is barbaric. And precisely because Putin is not able to succeed on the battlefield, he's taking the war to Ukraine civilians. And he's doing it in a very deliberate way. Going after the entire energy and electric infrastructure.
And again, this was put the October 26th. I know Putin's birthday was October 27th. These are all signs. So again, President Zelensky at this time, I think that now it's on you. Because I saw another report, thanks to the Crux, just on something between you and one of your delegates, the Russian, I believe, link, the boxer, the brother, I forgot his name, but I personally just looked at it as a great sign of how government relationships are supposed to work. Here's the president telling one of his mayors, is saying, your sector is, hey. And then it was done. Like, I put an end to it and just saying, hey, let's see it as it is and just do this. Let's not do any controversy. But again, I just keep hearing the same rhetoric from our media, our open media here, Fox, just saying it's all failures and Putin's looking for an off-ramp. It's not an off-ramp. It's an opportunity to see if we're on the same highway going the same direction in traffic, I guess is the way we put it. And President Putin, if I am mistaken, please feel free to come in and correct me, because I will listen and I will self-correct as leader of the United States of America should do. So as an example, this would be how I would have to present to a candid world that government needs to act in front of the people. Whoever wants to tune in on this is how the leaders are going to communicate. Whether it's indirect as this or indirect yet initiated as the initiated do.
To turn off the lights, to turn off the water, to turn off the heat, and that at a time when, of course, Ukraine is heading into winter. The head of NATO, Jens Stoltenberg, talked about weaponizing winter, and that's exactly what Putin is doing. It's also why.
So at this point, President Zelensky, you are at your final hour, where it's just now, unless you have another source of heat or something like that, your people are in real jeopardy. So let this be just another spare carrot to just find a way to, and I trust that God and the Holy Spirit will fill you as you find a way to get to these words that reach a compromise that I was speaking of in the beginning.
Not only are we seized with making sure that Ukraine has the systems it needs to defend itself, we're also seized with making sure that we're doing everything possible, again, as quickly as possible, to help them repair and replace everything that's being destroyed by the Russian onslaught. And just as we put this process together some months ago in Ramstein, Germany, to get them the defensive weapon systems that they need, so too we're doing that with energy, with equipment, with transformers, with generators, with spare parts. We met here in Bucharest, not just with NATO allies, but with the G7 countries and some other countries, to put in place a very coordinated process to make sure that as fast as we can, we're getting Ukraine what it needs to get through the winter, to make sure that men, women, children are not literally freezing to death. We heard from Foreign Minister Kuleba, my friend and counterpart, who just came from Kyiv, and described for all of the ministers here what life is like under this Russian onslaught. And by the way, this is not normal. This is the brutalization of a country and directly attacking everything its civilians, its citizens need to simply survive. And I hope that the world understands it and sees it that way. We are seized with this, and we're acting on it to get Ukraine everything we possibly can to get through the winter.
So just one last question then on this issue of weaponry and what they need. The New York Times has reported that you all at NATO are considering investing in, for instance, Slovakia, the Czech Republic, Bulgaria, factories that have made Soviet-era ammunition for artillery that apparently Ukraine is mostly using. Is that correct?
We're looking at every option to make sure that, again, they get what they need and what can be most effective for them. Some of that does go to Soviet-era systems that they've had in their inventory for decades, and for example, making sure that the ammunition is there for those systems. And in some cases, that may require producing things that haven't been produced for some time. So we are looking across the board at all of that. And Christian, even as we're working to get Ukraine what they need most urgently, we're also working to make sure that over the medium and long term, we're helping them build up their capacity to deter and defend against future aggression. Because when this war eventually comes to an end, one of the things that's going to be so critical is making sure that we've done everything possible to ensure that it doesn't repeat itself, that Russia doesn't renew its aggression against Ukraine. Part of that is making sure that Ukraine has, over the long term, the ability to deter aggression and to defend itself if aggression comes.
Can I move on to Iran? Because on the one hand, you and others obviously accuse Iran of supplying the Russians with much weaponry, but also especially these kamikaze drones that have caused a huge amount of damage and death. But I also want to ask you about your reaction to reports that Iran has told you and the international community and the IAEA that it plans to upgrade and increase its production and purity, power of uranium near to bomb capacity, move that to, an area that's difficult, for you all to attack. I believe it's the Fordo, and to increase its nuclear fuel production in other places that both the United States and Israel are accused of having sabotaged. What is your reaction to that? Have they told you that?
Well, first, Christian, I think the world is rightly focused on what's happening on the streets in Iran throughout the country. And that is incredibly brave young people, mostly women, who are standing up, speaking out for their most basic rights. And that, of course, has been the case since the killing of Mahsa Amini some months ago. And that's where the world's focus is. That's where our focus is. We've taken steps, as you know, to sanction those who've been responsible for trying to repress people peacefully protesting. We have worked as well to make sure that Iranians have, to the best of our ability, the communications technology that they need to continue to communicate with one another and to stay connected to the outside world. At the same time, we have continued to
I think that this is where, as a civilization, we are starting to realize that, yes, it's necessary to protest to be heard. But then when you're heard and you protest, then there's the pros and cons. And you create contests. And so this is where I, forgive me, have not been candid to what's going on necessarily here in Iran on the streets.
That the best way to deal with Iran's nuclear program is through diplomacy. As you know, we had an agreement, the so-called JCPOA, that put Iran's nuclear program in a box. Unfortunately, the decision was made to pull out of that agreement, and what we've seen virtually ever since is Iran building back its program. We've been very clear with them, and not just the United States, but others, including European partners, that they should not take additional steps to increase their nuclear capacity, including by enriching to higher levels. And if they pursue that direction, we'll be prepared to respond.
Your next trip is to China. I believe it's going to be your first such trip as Secretary of State. And President Biden has been, and he was trying to, as he said, lower the temperature and make sure that we don't enter a new Cold War. But I want to ask you, given what China did along with Saudi Arabia to block any meaningful word on fossil fuels and emissions at COP27, and the fact...
And Secretary Blinken, just my advice to you, just like I said, if you just would like to get that extra brownie, just bow before the leader when you meet him, and then offer the handshake. And then if you could learn how to say hello formally, I believe it's, I can't remember. But again, with technology, but that would be my recommendation. This is something we have not seen from our current leader. So I think it would be just a great step forward if you can reach these words before your trip.
That, you know, all they pretty much talk about in terms of international relations are security and Taiwan. If they're not going to play ball on climate, and if they're angry about Taiwan, and particularly Nancy Pelosi's visit, what is it that you all have to talk about? What can you hope to get out of visiting China?
Well, first, Christian, President Biden and President Xi had, I think, an important meeting in Bali, and one that was productive in the sense that
right here.
It's vitally important that we communicate clearly and directly to one another.
You know, and granted, you know, this may be an age thing, but ultimately Asian elders are all about just the signs of respect that people show them in this sense, to which here, nothing.
About our interests, about our intentions, about our policies, precisely because we're in a competition with China, the potential for miscommunication, for not at least understanding what each other is trying to do, that's something we have to guard against. And that's necessary, particularly if, as President Biden has said, we want to ensure that the competition we're engaged in does not veer into conflict. No one has an interest in that. So first and foremost, the trip that I'll take early next year is about continuing that communication, making sure that we have lines of communication that are open, that are clear, even when we disagree, and indeed disagree profoundly.
And which I already spoke about briefly in a video. Here. So, if you guys have any questions, please refer to this. But thank you for this time, and I hope these words reach you all well, and may all of this come to a peaceful resolution sooner than later, and may life be restored into the lands that have been victim to this trial and test of just where we stand on what is good and what is evil and what truly is the good, the overall good, which on the American end, I assure you, we have worked it out through me and science and all this stuff. So with that said, Godspeed, and I will be watching.